good afternoon, wherever I find you today in this great big land of ours. My name's Megan. I am part of the Learning Without Barriers team here at Life Without Barriers. I know that I'm joined by a number of my colleagues in the room today from our education team, so a shout out to those guys. But a big shout out to everybody who's come along today to join us for our monthly webinar. This one's called Young People's Digital Lives, Trends, Risks and Conversations, which I'm really delighted to be joined by some experts in the field, and I'll introduce you to those guys in a moment. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are all joining from unceded lands, lands that have been stolen, beautiful lands. I'm on the lands of the Yuggera and the Turrbal people here in Meanjin in Brisbane. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge this place has always been a place of learning and sharing. And I will acknowledge that it always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Again, thanks for taking the time to join us. Today's webinar is about digital technologies. We know that it's always a front of mind topic that we are dealing with constantly in our daily lives. So we know digital technologies are embedded in every aspect of the children and young people's experiences now. It's here. We know it's here. So what are we going to do about it? So from education to social connection to entertainment, creativity, identity, while these technologies provide incredible opportunities for learning and participation, they also raise important questions about the safety, well-being, digital literacy, equity and the role of the adults, so us in the room today who support the young people and children to navigate what is an increasingly complex landscape. We are incredibly fortunate to be joined today by two leading researchers in this field, and I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. Tiffany Apps. So Tiffany's here today, and she explores the digital practices of children and young people across everyday life and education context. Her research examines how children, families, teachers and schools engage with digital technologies, including social media, educational technologies and gaming. Tiffany brings a unique perspective on how digital technologies are shaping children's experiences and participation in contemporary society. Hey, Tiffany, thanks for coming along today.
Hi, everyone.
We're also joined by Dr. Karley Beckman, whose research focuses on digital inequality, digital literacy and children's use of technology. Karley's work explores how children, families and schools engage with digital technologies and the digital data generated through their use. Her research is dedicated to supporting safe, ethical and informed digital participation while protecting children's digital rights. Again, thank you both for joining us today and sharing your expertise with our Learning Without Barriers community. And so it's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to you to lead the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. It's always a bit intimidating hearing those very formal bios, but thank you very much. Okay, so Tiff and I are going to speak to you today about young people's digital lives and really unpacking some of the trends, risks, and the strategies, and you might see from the hint there about conversations that you can use to support the young people in your lives. Slide, Tiff. Thank you. Sorry. We'll make that those transitions a lot smoother as we go along, hopefully. Okay. I know Megan just did an acknowledgement of country, but we too would like to acknowledge the lands on which we present today. And Tiff and I are both on the lands of the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and just share with you this beautiful image that was taken on the Wadi track in our local region. And I thought that it's something that I've used in acknowledgements at other times, but just thought it was very fitting for this particular presentation today. And so this was a photo I took while walking on the track, and I looked up off the track and noticed this beautiful tree and rock merged together, and it was just so fascinating in the way that the tree had grown around the rock, almost supporting the rock, or maybe the rock was supporting the tree. It was difficult to tell. I just wanted to acknowledge this beautiful feature of the country on which we live, and how we can look to country as a teacher, and embrace those concepts and values of supporting one another, as we move through this session today. Tiff, slide. Okay, so just a quick overview. We do have a particular structure that we're going to go through today. So we'll start with looking at some trends and just sort of setting the scene, providing a bit of information about the current research around young people's digital lives. We'll use the term young people, but we are acknowledging that our research really spans from children from 0 to 18 years old. We've sort of pitched this as sort of mainly sort of tweens and teens, but please sort of jump in and let us know the ages that you're particularly interested in. And we're very much happy to sort of listen to you and adjust and accommodate. We're very flexible in the kinds of things that we might talk about and the strategies that we can share with you. Then we'll move on to the strategies for the adults here today in working with foster carers, or working with children yourselves. And then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. We'll also have some Q&A as we go through as well. So I'd love this to be as conversational as possible. So please feel free to raise your hand or pop a question in the chat at any point as we go through today.
Thanks, Karley. And I was good with the transition there because I knew it was my turn and kept me on my toes. I'm really pleased to be here today to share with you, and I just wanted to follow on from what Karley had said, is that in our role as researchers, we work a lot with children and young people, and our work is positioned in children's digital rights. So we are researchers, but we're also advocates for children and young people to enable them to participate safely in digital spaces. I think it's really important to preface the talk by really highlighting something that's missed in much of the conversation around children and technology, and that is that we live in a digitally mediated world. So children are growing up with technology around them in all aspects of their life. And so in preparing them to engage in their life in the here and now and in the future, we must consider the nature of the world that they're living in, and we have an obligation as adults to support them to participate in that world. And so there are a couple of things that are important about the world that we live in at the moment to point out, is that it is embedded in our society, in our everyday lives, in the infrastructure that we access to engage in society, but also in our cultures as well, in the subcultures that youth engage in. Digital media is really an important space and place for them to be, and often a safe space as well as a risky space. The digital space that we experience is interconnected, and it is in this state of continuing emergence. So it's constantly changing, and we're seeing often positioned to us as innovations, so new and emerging technologies that perhaps don't have the people or the users, and particularly children and young people, in mind. And that's because these technologies are built on this data-hungry commercial industry. And so that's a big change that we've seen in technologies over the last 15 to 20 years. That's really shifted the way that they are made and has led to some problematic designs that we see children, young people and adults ourselves grappling with, in terms of addictive designs, persuasive designs, nudging techniques, grabbing our attention. Because for the tech industry, attention is money, it's data, and it's money, and it's really valuable. So that's really important to understand when we think about the digital world. It is everyday but contentious, wonderful, full of opportunities, and full of risks as well. So how does digital technologies empower teens if it is full of risks? We do know that there are lots of positive aspects, and kids and young people tell us about these. So one of the things that adults do really well is talk about technology as a discrete and different thing. It is technology and we're doing this thing. But for children, technology really isn't just an extension of themselves. It's an extension of the relationships that they engage in, the games they might play, the way they access school, the way they access services. So it is this extension of their world. It is really positive in strengthening their existing offline relationships, and it can also be a negative as well. And I think that is really around the way that the spaces are structured and the way adults structure those spaces for children. Research is showing us too that technology can reduce social anxiety. So the use of streaming services and music at school can really reduce anxiety. That's one example. There is this wonderful thing with the internet that we can connect with like-minded people. So connecting in beyond the physical space that we're at and connecting with people we already know, but new groups of young people who are similar and experiencing similar identity work or similar hobbies and things like that. Young people are accessing health information and mental health resources, which are critically important. And then the idea of play in digital spaces is has really a positive impact on young people's lives. Something that one of the projects that Karley and I are working on at the moment with a bunch of international colleagues, looking really closely at 14 to 16-year-old children's gameplay. And one of the emerging and very interesting finding is that gaming can be a protective factor for young people. It actually helps to balance their life, and it's a safe place for them. So we're really excited about that research and being able to share the positives of digital media for children and young people, as opposed to the negative stories that we tend to dominate the discourse at the moment. Karley.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thanks, Tiff. So I'm just summing up some of those points that we've just made so far, is just recognizing and situating this. Can we actually separate digital from our lives and from the young people and children's lives that we're working with? And it is a feature of contemporary society that it is increasingly difficult to disconnect the digital from other aspects of our lives. So we must acknowledge that in the way that we approach any kind of advice or strategies that we might use. And just to reiterate that we do want to acknowledge that digital technology is not neutral. So it does shape and influence practices and engagement. And we are operating in a space where children have digital rights. They have a right to freedom of expression, and that includes in online environments, rights to participate, to play. They have a right to privacy as well, and a right to access information. So these are all really important rights that we need to support children to realise and advocate for as well. And in the advice that we give today, we'll really try to focus on moving away from this sort of approach of protecting children and young people to empowering them so that they can take increasing control and agency over their practices. Tiff, did you want to go to the next slide? And so now we'll move into talking about some of the trends and particular kinds of technologies that children and young people use from the research literature. But before I dive in, I'd like to just take a moment to stop and to ask you, what are some of the technologies or particular kinds of devices that you're seeing that are at the forefront of your mind in coming to a session like today? What are the kinds of things that you might have concerns or questions about? If you could pop them in the chat, or if you're interested, please unmute and tell us a little bit about what you're interested in, because this can help us to sort of adapt and to move through the next sections.
And this is where I should have some thinking music cued. I always
Unless someone's brave and wants to jump in and just speak up. But I know maybe not everyone's in the position where they can do so, but I do welcome you to pop it in the chat, and I'll keep my eye on the chat, or Tiff and I both keep our eye on the chat as we're going.
Oh, we've got someone who's
Terrific.
just tried to talk, Karl.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Dale speaking. I'm happy to.
Hi, Dale.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, I guess we're really interested in kind of thinking about it, like thinking about it in relationship to the positive angles of understanding the digital lives of young people, and we really resonate with that. It is part of a young person's life. It's not like it's something outside of them that's very connected and very part of the sort of whole ecosystem of the young person's experience. I guess what we're really, from our other work in education, interested in the rights of children to access digital media in a way that is safe. And what I mean by that is not data scraped and not all that sort of that piece. And I'm really kind of interested to understand what the digital child's work is doing in relationship to those protections, particularly because we've got the ban in Australia that doesn't seem to be really kind of hitting yet. So I'm keen to kind of understand what you think about that balance, I guess, that, we certainly don't want, we've had experiences of young people that have been very harmed through bullying, etc., online, but then to sort of take those places of connection and attachment and friendship away, then it creates this really disconnected young person. So that space is what I'd be really interested in.
Terrific, Dale. Yes, we'll definitely touch on some of those points and address those as we move through this next section. They're really important points.
And Karley, in the chat, there's some types of digital media like social media, exposure, thinking about gaming addiction and safety in gaming spaces. And then another participant has suggested thinking about right versus responsibilities, which I think is a really interesting frame. I think rights come with responsibilities. So we'll think about those as we share some of the, I guess, case studies of the digital media that young people are engaging with in the next section. Thank you. That's useful.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we will begin with everyone's favourite topic, social media. So it is a hot topic. It's a hot topic in Australia and also globally. We seem to be rightly or wrongly leading the way with banning children's access to social media. So it is something that is of keen interest to Karley and I, and also to researchers in the digital child. So we do know that social media is a space where children and young people have been, and they continue to be. So, you can see here his little infographic from the Black Dog in 2024 prior to the bans on the kinds of percentages of kids who are engaging with social media, and that's supposed to say teens, should be double E in there. And we also know that this is so 13-year-olds to 17-year-olds, but we also know that young kids is between 8 and 12 prior to the ban. A large portion of them, over 60% of them, were engaging with social medias regularly. And so something that's really important to think about when we talk about the way that children come to engage with social media is that goes back to the point I made in the beginning, is that we're embedded in these digital societies. So children begin experiencing social media through other people, through peers, through adults around them, through conversations and shared practices. They don't just come to having an account in isolation. So they begin learning from quite a young age, just through engaging with others' practices. And that's really important for us to think about, particularly when we have these conversations around just banning and taking away, because they're still exposed and they're still engaging in various ways. And we do know this from some of the emerging data from eSafety themselves, who paint quite a positive picture of the ban, but we can still see that, say, for example, 3 out of the 10 parents who were surveyed in eSafety's initial survey reported that their child no longer had an account. And I'm sure anecdotally that many people know children who are still engaging with social media. One of the interesting, I guess, examples from the work that we do is that, for example, YouTube is one of the included platforms in the bans. And so children are still accessing YouTube via school, and if they're in public schools, via their school accounts. So there's really some interesting tensions around the way the messaging that children are getting around the bans. And actually what's really happening. I would say in Australia, there are some other moves going on to protect children. So while personally and professionally, I've been vocally critical of a ban because I think that banning children is not a good solution. There's problems with the design of social media for children and young people, as well as adults, that could be addressed in a more targeted way, but more complicated to do, I acknowledge. I've just lost my train of thought. I thought I'm getting off topic here because this is my favorite thing to talk about. I'm going to just click to the next. No, I'm not going to.
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry?
I think it was just a recording notification.
I will say that in Australia, there are some more targeted solutions being developed, I guess, across agencies. So, for example, just to talk to Dale's point, the Digital Child has been working very closely with the OAIC on giving some very frank consultation and feedback on the Children's Code, which will be launched in December, which aims to better protect children's privacy across platforms. The point that I was going to make is that many of these persuasive design features, addictive design features, aren't just limited to social media. They are rooted in the nature of technology today, wanting to be data hungry and extract our data, and we see them across tools that are designed for children and for adults. The Children's Code, the draft Digital Duty of Care, these are some really promising legislative and regulatory reforms that we have been engaged in that might help to better protect Australian children. I guess it's also about advocating for what are the spaces that we as adults imagine for children. And so another piece of work from the Digital Child is around the children's internet. So instead of getting caught up in the conversation around what to do and how to fix the problem, starting from the beginning. And if we think in children's television media, we have the ABC, which is a trusted source. And so there was work initially to create this space for children in TV media. And could we do the same for creating space for children in the internet as well? So that's just an example of some of the work that we're doing that's more kind of proactive. So we're in that reactive space, but we're really pushing for investments and reimagining of what safe spaces might look like for children and young people that address their agency and their evolving capacities. Sorry, Karley, I went a little bit off script there, so I'm going to hand over to you to talk about school social media. And I think the segue is that we're banned from, children are banned from social media, but they're still engaging it in different ways. They're still accessing it via schools. And in particular, schools are still using social media to share and datify children in their everyday. So
Thanks, Tiff. And so Tiff and I have been engaging in some research about this particular phenomena. And our research shows that schools are sharing, and for some schools, hundreds of images of children per week via their school social media sites. And I think many people, if they didn't already have a child in a primary school in particular, are completely unaware of this phenomena until you're sort of engaged in it and presented with this constant feed of images and information of children. So just as a sort of side note, I thought it was important to mention for everyone to be aware that this practice is happening, and schools do require written consent from a parent or carer in order to publish this information on social media. So it's useful to note and to check those permissions to see what is being shared about children, and whether any updates or additional information needs to be provided to the school. And we're happy to take questions on that at a later time. So another, I guess, technology that's quite topical and of interest, people have mentioned it in the chat, is, of course, artificial intelligence. An increasingly important issue to continue to talk about, as this technology really changes at quite a fast pace. This is a really useful example to discuss, because it is easy to feel helpless or not well equipped to deal with how to support children in this space, because AI does seem to be developing at such a fast rate. So there's quite a number of issues here on the slide. We don't have particular figures and data because we'd probably need 20 slides to fit it all in. So I'm going to just sort of skim over some of these really important themes, just to sort of share what the key issues are here and the trends and the research, and news reports as well about what's happening in the space of AI, in particular for children and teens. And so many of us who have teenagers in our lives or have read the news would know that deepfakes are increasingly prevalent. And so just for anyone who doesn't know, this involves using AI to take an existing image or an image of a face and to swap out that face onto another image, or to create a likeness of that person doing something that they didn't necessarily do. So manipulation of the photo or the video. And these can commonly be used for sexual images, or might be used in sextortion cases where someone is blackmailed or threatened for information to be shared publicly. So this is a really concerning issue that we know that schools and families and teens are dealing with in increasingly prevalent rate. The laws are being changed in order to address this. There are some really useful guides and activities, particularly by eSafety, who are taking a lot of action in this space. And so I'd recommend, and we'll move to the strategies a bit later, but there is some clear guidance and avenues for support there around what to do when things go wrong in this space. But also just making sure that we understand what these things are, the prevalence, and to talk to children and young people about it in age-appropriate ways. Misinformation is also a really important topic when we're talking about AI. So we know that children and young people are using AI to do schoolwork, or now just to engage in a Google search. So the most recent updates in many of our browsers and on our phones is now replacing a simple Google search with an AI-generated response. So even if we're not seeking out to use AI, it is at our fingertips. There are ways to change the settings on some phones, or to use particular browsers. So Firefox is one particular browser that is a bit problematic in some instances. It doesn't tend to always be agreeable, but doesn't currently have AI as the default response when you engage in a Google search. And so, again, talking to young people and children about these features so that they are aware that they exist is really important, because we know that the information that is generated from AI responses is not always accurate and can be misleading. I'll move down to the last point about the emergence of parasocial relationships as well. So a parasocial relationship with AI is a one-sided emotional connection where a child or a teen or a person of any age can treat an AI chatbot or a virtual agent as a trusted companion or confidant. Even though we know that AI is just processing the predictive text, the prompts that we provide, it does act in a way that replicates or mimics a social and emotional relationship with the individual, which in itself can be quite manipulative. So just being aware of the increasing emergence of this pattern of use, which again, as I mentioned before, is increasingly accessible through all of our apps that we use. I noticed just yesterday on WhatsApp a new update where the Meta AI is the first thing that pops up when you open up the app. And the prompts that it provides, the ways that it encourages users to engage with it is, I think, quite alarming. So some of the initial prompts is, do you need some relationship advice, as a particular prompt? So we know that this is being fed to children and young people, even if they're not seeking it out. Tiff, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, no, I think you've done a great job. I think one of the things to know is that tech is really big tech, and these companies are quite sophisticated at understanding who their users are through the data that they collect. So there's this kind of misconception that we need to have age assurance through photos and things, but the data points that they collect can quite accurately make a prediction around the age of the user. And you can really see, in terms of a ChatGPT interface, through the differentiated nudging techniques, that the tools really have a sense of the age of their user. So they'll be nudging teens and young people for different kinds of information in different kinds of ways. So it is very targeted and really around building that dependency, because more attention and more data from young people and adult users creates more value for those companies. So just being aware that they are very sophisticated.
I don't feel right about it, and I'm hysterical.
Okay, so just looking at the time, we'll move on to chatting about video games, which some people have asked about in the chat. So we know that many children and young people play video games. So just some recent-ish data shows over 93% of 15 to 14-year-olds and 91% of 15 to 24-year-olds play video games on a weekly basis. Now, we did mention before that there are some positives to this, to playing video games in young people's lives, but for roughly around 3% of Australian adolescents, it does move into being less positive. And we know that 3% of adolescents have been reported to have internet gaming disorder. Now, this is a particular disorder that has been acknowledged by the World Health Organization, where young people have significant problems in controlling their gaming use, and it significantly impacts other aspects of their lives. Apart from being able to diagnose internet gaming disorder, there isn't a lot of information that really differentiates between normal and then problematic gaming behavior. And this is particularly a research project that Tiff and I are involved with at the moment, in identifying the markers of when healthy gameplay moves into problematic kind of gameplay, where the child or young person starts to lose the ability to control their gameplay, to balance their activities, their non-gaming activities with their video gaming. And so we're at the point of just getting very close to finishing our data collection for that project, and hope to have some findings released before the end of the year on that one. But just anecdotally, from some of the things that we've started to see emerging, is that we know that some gaming for some people can be a really enjoyable activity, and it can operate in a really harmonious kind of way in balance with other aspects of their lives. So it's a promising kind of finding that's coming out of that study. Moving just to the last point, we do know that there is some research that shows that higher hours of gaming is associated with higher rates of depression. And so those kinds of hours are quite extreme. But we also do know that in some research, people can engage in gaming for quite a significant number of hours, yet still find a balance. So just to sort of hedge that, to say that these findings and these harms aren't universal necessarily, and we need to consider the particular person and the context. So just to sum up some of the risks and safety concerns and points about well-being that we've just covered in some of those technology uses just there, is that we know that some technology use is associated with problematic uses, and we'd associate that when we see a loss of control over the activity, a withdrawal from other activities, or an inability to balance technology use with other aspects of a child or young person's life. The research also shows that sleep disruption is also another risk that we haven't explicitly talked about, that's associated with significantly long time spent on screens, particularly into the night. Mental health and psychological well-being issues associated with all of the uses of technology that we just mentioned. Cyberbullying is something that we haven't explicitly discussed, but is prevalent through social media use, as well as online interactions with video gaming. Exposure to harmful and inappropriate content is another issue, and in our discussions with children is something that they are particularly interested in and aware of, and have expressed that they want support with. They want adults to help them to be able to, one, protect them, but then also to be able to support with strategies to avoid harmful and inappropriate content. But I just want to reiterate the last point there, in that I just sort of made a moment ago as well, is that these risks are not universally experienced. So while the research shows us that these are some patterns in the risks for children and young people, just because a child is video gaming for a few hours a day does not necessarily mean that they are going to experience these risks and harms. And I also want to point out that the harms and risks that are outlined here are not always symptomatic of the technology use. So it could be there are patterns shown between these factors and technology use, but perhaps there are other aspects of children and young people's lives that are at play in creating these harms.
Yeah, and I guess, Karley, something that I might add to that, particularly from our video gaming research, is that often children who are using technology are using it to meet a need, so for their need satisfaction. And so children who are experiencing unstable life environments or movement around may be finding need satisfaction in video gaming and connection in video gaming. So that's a really nice example to illustrate the statement that Karley just made around risks not being universally experienced and not symptomatic of technology use, and actually illustrate where technology can provide that space to meet needs temporarily or for an extended period, but looking really to provide a balance, to introduce balance alongside those spaces where children's needs are being met.
And another example of that is children and young people who are neurodiverse, or gender diverse as well. Their uses of social media to connect with social groups can also be a protective factor for their well-being as well. I might stop before we move on and ask if there are any questions or comments at this stage before we just talk about the practical strategies, and I'll give you a moment. I guess as we move into this section about practical strategies, we want to reiterate that while some of these trends in technology use and the harms that are associated with it feel very unfamiliar and quite unprecedented, often the strategies and the supports that we provide don't necessarily need to be. They are more familiar, and we can rely on our sort of more familiar toolkit.
I wonder, it might be useful for us to have a sense of the resources or supports that you're able to draw on currently. So maybe if you could drop those in the chat as we move through, just looking at the time, or raise your hand, happy to stop and listen. I think that could be useful as well for us. So we're going to begin this discussion around practical strategies by sharing with you some of our more academic work in a way, and an idea that we've been positing, and we're hoping to get some funding to be able to explore this model, particularly with children as they transition to high school in our initial empirical testing of the model. But I'll hand over to Karley to share why we think it's useful to think about digital skills as not just literacies, but regulation as well.
So when we're trying to, thanks Tiff, when we're trying to support young people and children in controlling and thinking about their uses of digital technologies, focusing on just the child or just the technology overlooks the other elements at play. And so we've drawn on our work around self-regulation to develop this sort of thinking frame that helps us to visualize some of those other aspects that are at play and that influence children and young people's uses of technology. And so here we draw on sort of three themes, three factors that really help us to understand children's uses of technologies. And the first is the behaviors. So thinking about their emotions and their behavioral control and their ability to control those in their everyday activities. This is essentially self-regulation, which we can use to think about all of children's behaviors, but particularly we can focus in on their engagement with digital technologies. Now, those behaviors are also shaped by their knowledge of the ways that technology is designed to influence one's behaviors. So Tiff mentioned before some of the persuasive design features of technology. It's features of being extractive in nature and data hungry, which means that attention and time spent is key in the design of technologies. And so having an awareness of the ways that technologies are designed to keep us engaged, to keep us active, to keep us providing more information and data is really important, because that interplays and interconnects with our ability to control our own emotions and behaviors when we're using those technologies. Another important factor is the skills and knowledge that we have about the technology itself, apart from the particular kind of thinking about design, is ways that having just a general understanding of the digital technologies and the skills and knowledge to be able to use them effectively. And we commonly kind of call this digital literacy, but it helps us to understand the ways that we can use technology effectively. So I guess unpacking this with an example is useful to visualize the interplay of these elements and how they shape a child's technology use. So if we think about risky behaviors on social media as an example, and I did have an example to share with you about sort of using Snapchat, but someone in the chat, Ruby in the chat said, red pill content is something that is of interest. So maybe I might just adapt and use that as an example. So, which sharing information and engaging with that kind of information is in itself a kind of risky behavior. So we know that technology is designed to encourage users to engage with particular content. And so the algorithmic logic of the social media site that young men might be engaging with, particularly with this kind of content, is really important to have an awareness of and an understanding of that technological design and the way that information can be fed to users based on their engagement. So just viewing one particular video can really sort of put you down a path of receiving content, a very limited kind of content. We also know that the design of technologies is designed to sort of take advantage of teens' sort of inclination to be impulsive and to take risks. And so they might be more inclined to share or repost or engage with this sort of content that is risky in nature, and feels like that they're having an opportunity to test out their agency in this space and to find who they are. So having knowledge of this model and having an understanding of the way that the platform operates can really help teens and young people to have a more well-rounded understanding of their engagement with this kind of content on social media and to be more aware of the kinds of risks that they're taking in that space. Did you move to the next slide?
I was just thinking together with the digital literacies to seek alternate information and what that skill looks and feels like. So those three components together can be quite powerful in engaging with alternate information.
Yeah. And I guess having the knowledge to be able to reset your algorithms, I guess, is another example of that knowledge and skills.
Okay, so we're going to talk through 4 simple frames that are useful for adults to engage with children around their digital media uses. And the reason that we keep saying digital media uses is because we just really want to make explicit that when we talk about screen time and we think about time and devices, we're really limited in what we can do, and we fall into this sort of panic mode of anxiety, adult-driven anxiety and fear. And so we want to move beyond just thinking about the screen and thinking about the time to be thinking about the context of use, the content, and the connections that are being facilitated. And as Karley had mentioned earlier, this is really quite specific to each child and each situation. So coming at that with that understanding is really useful. It can be also really useful for adults to begin to think about the nature of the technology in the way that Karley just explained. There is a lot of learning to do around the design of technologies and why they're designed in that way. And understanding that as an adult can be really useful in supporting young people. So we really strongly advocate for information seeking as adults. I know it's a tricky space to be in and it's another responsibility, but building that understanding of the technology and the broad infrastructure can be really supportive. And the eSafety has a range of really great guides, as well as Raising Children Network Karley just showed me today they've created a whole updated new site that's really nuanced and allows you to dig into like those tech models, but also the content, context, and connections. I'm just looking at the time. We've really overextended ourselves here. So I'll move on quickly to the next frame, which is connecting, and pass over to Karley.
So apart from equipping yourself with the understanding about the technologies, I think one of the most effective strategies that we can use is to try and connect with the young people in our lives and to understand their digital lives in order to open up conversations. And so this, I think the most important points here is creating space for communication and trying to create trust with the young people. So we can do this by learning about their favorite games, their apps or sites. When we're working with younger children, co-viewing or using technology with them. So this is an opportunity to understand the technology. So you're sort of doing two things at once, but really understanding the child as well. And that creates incredible insights into what they're doing, what the issues might be, and how you can support them. Developing shared rules and very clear boundaries of technology use is key. But this ideally could be done in a way that connects with the child. So it's not being sort of imposing on them, but being established with them. And having regular conversations about their digital lives, just as you would with any other aspect of their day, asking them how their day is, add in some questions about their uses of technology. And again, eSafety, an incredible source of information, has some conversation starters. It's a little PDF guide that just has a couple of ideas to get started with the kinds of questions that you could ask.
And then modelling. I guess modelling is powerful in that we can model these digital self-regulation behaviours ourselves. And I would say, I guess, sharing vulnerabilities, limitations, and questions is a great way to model uncertainty in digital environments. We all often feel uncertain and can create a space to have conversations with kids. I think thinking out aloud those vulnerabilities as well, and maybe thinking about the way that you've set your own boundaries and why you've set those, and explaining those in context of the boundaries that you're setting for the children that are in your care at the time, I think is also quite useful. I'll leave it at that because I could go a little bit further, but I'll pass over to Karley because I'm thinking about the time too.
And the last one is about supporting. So I guess when things aren't going well, or there is a time of need, the child is having some troubles with a particular kind of technology use, you want to be able to encourage young people to seek your support in these moments. And so some strategies that you might need to be able to do that is to know the support services and the trusted sources of information. You don't always need to act immediately, but you can do that together. And so we've just put together some of the best and most trusted sources that we have at our fingertips. And we are lucky to have these sources in Australia, all Australian based. So the eSafety Commissioner has terrific parent info and guides. We've acknowledged some of those sources. As Tiff said, the Raising Children Network has just expanded its offerings. It's already a trusted source of information for parents and carers. And now also has great guides on, they call it entertainment and technology per specific age group. And all of the content there is informed by a broad network of Australian-based research as well as international research. And some of that has been informed by the research in the Centre of Excellence of the Digital Child. Also a useful source of information, but focused on younger children. And then the Black Dog Institute also has some great resources for families and parents of teens, older children.
And at that point, I think we might stop sharing because I'm conscious of the time. But Karley and I do have time to take questions if you have any specific questions. So I'll stop sharing and we can just open it up for some final questions.
Thank you so much. Somebody said their baby's awake and they need to go now, but thank you from the chat. Again, thank you so much to Tiff and to Karley for spending the time with us today. I realise people are probably going to be moving on to the next part of their days right now, but if there is anyone in the room with a burning question, feel free to shout it out or pop it in the chat. Really enjoyed the content today. Thank you both very much. We really appreciate the connection we have with the Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. We use your content often, and so it's really nice to see the trusted information come around, because when we prepare some of our content for those around us, we often use those ones. So it's nice to be reinforced that we're on the right track, and what you've done today, that connection. I really love the content connection support element of how adults are in the space. I think it's a really helpful part of what we're doing here, and what we're trying to walk alongside of children and young people in technology use, and ensuring that their rights are upheld when it comes to technology use. So we really appreciate it, and we hope to stay connected with you in the future. On behalf of everyone, thanks so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We also are, super interested. We know that you have some very unique information needs around technologies that are a bit different to everyday parenting. So we're really interested in understanding what they are and how we might be able to better support you. So, if you do have any particular needs, please do let us know, and we can talk about how we might continue to connect and think about how we can support Learning Without Barriers and your great staff and carers in the roles that they're doing too.
Thank you so much. That's super appealing. I can see, and just my team shaking, nodding their heads. So thank you. Hey, I'm going to let everybody go and have lunch. Yeah. So thanks so much, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you. Thanks, Tiff. Thanks, Karley. Really lovely to meet you guys.
Bye.